Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our podcast in relation to franchising for growth, jointly provided by NatWest Bank, Lime Licensing and Darwin Gray. We've got three panel members today who are going to be discussing various franchising related issues with, first of all, Peter Howe, who is Franchise Development Manager for NatWest Bank, Kevin Thomas, Regional Director with Lime Licensing, and Siobhan Williams, who's an Associate Solicitor with Darwin Gray. So, hello everybody. The title for the discussion today is Franchising for Growth. And I mean, that's a fairly broad topic and quite a few issues that might be raised by it. But I'd like to sort of think about initially where we are with the current economic climate and whether at this point in time, given where we are and what's happened over the last 10 months, whether now would be a good time to franchise a business. And Kevin, obviously you're involved in franchising consultancy work. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
At Lime, we always think there's a good time for franchise. It's our business, but I have to say, and I think if we take COVID out of the equation at the moment, because really we're in a recession, and recessions are actually welcomed by franchisors because it gives them a much bigger pool of potential franchisees. And we've seen in the last, certainly since the lockdown started in March, but certainly in the last 6 months, a huge increase in the number of businesses contacting us who want the franchise. And in fact, I launched 2 new businesses last week, and we've got 3 or 4 that are due to come on stream in the next 2 to 3 weeks. At the moment, recessions inevitably lead to job losses, and so there's pressure on second incomes as well. And what we're finding is that the main breadwinner is maybe being furloughed or maybe even losing their job. So the partner or husband, wife, whatever, are looking to basically contribute now to that. So we're seeing a much bigger increase in demand for either part-time or flexible franchises. So anything that work from home, that type of thing, that requires low overheads, doesn't require premises, doesn't necessarily require face-to-face contact. They're what we're now seeing as being at the sort of top of the list. Pre-COVID, we'd have been looking at food and drink, mobile, after-school clubs, that type of thing, but they seem to be suffering now.
And that's interesting, Kevin. Peter, what's your experience on the financing side? Does that reflect what Kevin just said?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think there's always winners and losers in all types of economic backdrops. Recession absolutely is a tough economic place to be at the moment, but very much, yes, we're seeing that interest. Yes, there's probably franchisors that I've spoken to have had a lot more inquiries. Maybe there needs to do a little bit more work and sift through those a little bit, because there's potentially some of those job hunters out there rather than maybe people who might be suitable business owners, for example. So there might be a little bit more legwork need to be done around the recruitment process, but absolutely I think we are seeing that. And from our point of view, obviously, we want to look at, is this a business that you can operate in the current world we live in? And as Kevin mentioned, if it works online or if it can still trade in a normal way, then absolutely it's something that we could look to support as well. So yeah, I think on the whole, that's probably a fair picture of where we are.
And it's an interesting point you made there, Peter, about whether you've got people just hunting jobs or whether you've got suitable franchisees who are sufficiently sort of business-like. Because that leads into my next point that I was going to ask Kevin, which is, if you've been made redundant or you've decided you're going to have a big life change, is it a good time to buy a franchise at the moment? And I suppose that also begs the question is, what sort of people should be doing that? And if you're just sort of looking for a job, is that the right approach?
You should never buy a franchise if you're looking for a job, because at the end of the day, you're going to set up a business and you're only going to get out of it what you put into it. We're seeing now the sort of profile of franchise inquiries coming from all walks of life. I'm getting company directors contacting us, down to people who may have been doing, relatively low skilled jobs, all looking now to basically take their destiny in their own hands. I think as well that Brexit's had a bit of an impact. I know we don't, we sort of come away from Brexit, we've got other things to think about with COVID. But, the UK government really needs to stimulate the startup economy. And one of the pluses we're seeing now is the access to, and I know Peter will probably talk about funding in a moment, but the access to the government startup loans. You know, if people can borrow up to £25,000, and we've had 3 or 4 people approach us about buying a franchise, so the 3 of them together can borrow up to 75,000, and that does take a hurdle away from a lot of people, you know, when it comes to franchising, because you do need to be able to buy that franchise. To go back to what you were saying, Steve, about, you know, is now a good time to buy one. There are lots of franchises available now. Many franchisors are offering either an early adopter discount, and in some cases they're not charging monthly royalties for the first maybe 6 months. And one I've seen doesn't charge royalties for the first 12 months. And that's obviously beneficial to the franchisee because it means they can build up some working capital. It takes away the pressure of having to think, I've got to pay this every month, and allows them to concentrate really on building the business. But again, it goes back to the type of business they're going to buy. You know, that I don't think there's much point really in looking at a franchise at the moment that has been badly affected by COVID. There are COVID-proof franchises out there. You know, window cleaning, you're working outside, you've not got, you know, gardening, that type of thing. But even cleaning and oven cleaning, and you know, we're seeing a lot of inquiries for those because people want these services. It's whether or not they can go in and actually provide the service under the current lockdown restrictions.
Because you hear anecdotally, don't you, about the fact that, you know, because everybody's been stuck indoors, everybody's been getting all their house renovations done and buying stuff for their property and all the rest of it. But as you say, the difficulty there is to be able to actually get people in to do that kind of work. And I guess there's probably some franchises out there that have actually had a bit of a boom because of the lockdowns and coronavirus and all that kind of thing. There's bound to be some, aren't there?
It certainly has. I mean, you know, if you see a lot of the contract cleaning franchises now are offering this fogging service, you know, so they can actually go in and literally clean an office in minutes with these fogging devices. And in fact, one company I was talking to, they can go into a hospital ward and not have to take the patients out and actually disinfect that ward whilst the patients are still there.
Sounds miraculous.
Yeah, I know. But there are obviously lots of companies as well that purport to be able to do that. And so if you're looking for that type of franchise, you really do need to do your due diligence.
Fair enough. And I'm just thinking more widely then about franchising, because, you know, lots has happened. I mean, anybody listening to this podcast will who's been in the franchising industry will have had you know, some experiences over the last 10 to 12 months, whether they're good or bad. And I'm just thinking what you all think about, you know, to use a sort of colloquial phrase, what we've learned about franchising over the last 10 months. I mean, just following on from you, Kevin, I mean, what would you say from your perspective are the things that have really kind of come to the fore as a result of what we've all been experiencing over the last 10 months or so?
Well, we've learned really that franchising is pretty resolute. And you know, previous recessions and previous credit crunches have seen franchising come out the blocks pretty quickly. There's now, it's a bit more of a compressed market in some ways because there are fewer sectors at the moment that you could probably go into where you could operate the business successfully. But demand is still very, very high. I think the other things we've learned are certainly the businesses at the beginning of this. I wrote an article a while ago, which we put on LinkedIn through the Lime website about pause, panic, or prepare. You know, and those who paused might as well have panicked, because those who prepared were the ones who are now coming out of this with a pretty stable franchise network. They've got a relatively happy franchise network. You know, they've been the ones who maybe have offered their franchisees payment holidays and been there and support them as much as they can, because that, you know, that tunnel is still pretty dark, but we do know there's light at the end of it. And those are the businesses that when they come out, they're the ones that are going to be very successful. You know, there have been people who've tried to get on the bandwagon and launch businesses that may or may not have been the right thing to do. Because of course there's always someone who thinks there's an opportunity here, you know, in bad times. But I think also that we've also seen that the people who are looking to buy franchises are now certainly more clued in. You know, they're doing their due diligence a lot more. Whereas before somebody would think, I'm going to buy a franchise, they'd almost say, how much is it? When can I buy it? Now we're having much longer conversations. We're having more conversations with people. We're advising them as well on making sure that it's right for them.
Yeah.
Because of this pool of people who've got all these different skill sets, it's not much point if somebody's a shrinking wallflower, if they're looking to buy a franchise where you've got to spend a lot of time doing business development.
I mean, there is always there always generally an element of business development with franchises, isn't there? I mean, it's
some more than others. Yeah, I mean, some require a huge amount of cold calling.
Yeah.
So if that isn't your bag, you shouldn't be looking at doing it.
No.
You're probably not going to make a success of it.
No.
And so we're probably spending more time advising potential franchisees than we are the franchisors, because it's relatively straightforward with a business. They want a franchise, we'll review it and say, yeah, we think it's right or we think it's wrong. With a franchisee, and a franchisee may come to us and say, I've looked at the following 5, 10, and we will go through every one of them with them and try and match their skill sets to the right one.
Yeah, that's interesting, that process, isn't it? I mean, Peter, coming to you for a minute, we seem to have lost Siobhan. That's the vagaries of the internet. Hopefully she'll appear at some point. If not, I'll have to do a bit for her. But just what's your perspective on that sort of learning process over the last 10 months or so?
Yeah, I think a real sort of mixed bag. I think that the franchisors that have been successful maintaining that momentum are the ones who've had that good communication with their networks and shared information and been open and, as you say, maybe offered those breaks in MSF, etc., just to sort of, promote the growth and keep that sort of positive feeling among the network. The more communication, the better, I guess. And I think, from someone coming in, I guess a franchisee, obviously always, as the key message is, do your due diligence, make sure it's something that you're going to want to wake up to each day and put that passion into. But I suppose more than ever, what support has the franchisor given the network? Those are the sorts of questions you might be asking. What have you done for your guys during this difficult time? And if the sales are up, how is that going to be maintained? Or if the sales are down, when is it likely to return to some normality? Just those sorts of questions about when is normal going to return are a key. And what is normal? No one knows for sure, but at the end of the day, there are, as we've said, there's winners and losers, and at the moment there's some businesses who are trading maybe 200% up, which is great, but is that maintainable for the long term? What's going to be the new normal? And those sorts of diligence questions you'd want to know when you're looking to come in and buy a potential franchise post COVID, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting as well, Steve, that we're finding that this lockdown is actually allowing people to commit to buying a franchise, and is giving them the opportunity to prepare for when we do come out of it. So they'll virtually have all the blocks in place, ready then to start trading. And again, that is happening more and more.
No, I could see that as being an advantage. So please see Siobhan's joined us again. So I was just really coming to you again, just on this point about the experiences in franchising over the last 10 months. I mean, just thinking about any kind of client legal issues that might have come up over the last 10 or 12 months that you could think of.
I mean, generally, I think we've seen with our franchisor clients that they have actually been quite effective to diversify their business to keep things going for their franchisees. And I think generally there's been quite a clear coming together of people trying to work together in the best efforts to make the best of a situation. It is obviously really tricky for some types of franchises that just can't operate, and it's really difficult for them to diversify. Aside from that, I mean, I suppose there have been some breakdown in relationships between franchisor and franchisee, which I think is probably symptomatic of perhaps people just getting really frustrated and finding it difficult to continue functioning. But I mean, there hasn't been a huge amount of disputes that we've seen, but there has been a few more than normal, perhaps.
Okay, well, I mean, we've sort of talked quite a bit there about, the effect of lockdown and that kind of thing. But we did come to this with the idea of talking about franchising for growth. So I just wanted to sort of think about some more general franchising issues that people who are thinking of either franchising a business or buying a franchise might be interested in. And just coming to you, Siobhan, on that. I mean, one of the things that we sometimes get asked in the legal profession is whether, if you've got a business and you want to grow it, whether you're best off franchising it or licensing it, and whether there's what the difference is between the two. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective on the legal side, what the sort of thoughts are on that.
Sure. From the legal side, I mean, fundamentally, a franchise is a license to use the intellectual property that somebody's built up in a business. So be that their branding, their trade name, the system that they've developed. But a franchise is a lot more comprehensive than a simple license. With a franchise, as a franchisor, you have a lot more obligations on you in terms of the amount of support that you need to provide to your franchisee throughout the term of the franchise, and also in terms of the amount of perhaps equipment or items that you need to provide your franchisee with at the outset, so they can sort of hit the ground running and begin trading. However, the flip side to that is it does actually offer you a lot more control than a simple license would over your franchisees in terms of how they operate your franchise system. You usually have a very comprehensive document called a manual, which is sort of akin to a Bible, really, and that's sort of the holy grail of how you operate that system as defined by the franchisor. And franchise agreements and sort of the franchising sector generally, there's no franchising law in the UK, but over the years there have been a number of conventions that have been developed, so things sort of occur in a particular way in franchising, and that's the norm. Whereas with a simple license, the relationship is a lot looser, and you can agree effectively as much or as little as you want, and that license is going to be incredibly bespoke just between you and your licensee. So generally, if you want to have sort of a lot of control, which most people want when they're franchising their business, I think they're comfortable that everyone's going to run the business in the same way, then you'd want to be going down the franchising route in order to have that more control and sort of uniformity of approach. Kevin, I don't know if you've got any views on sort of the differences and when people might opt for one over the other.
Well, what we tend to see is that licensing is usually around a product. That's what we tend to get involved in. So if somebody comes, someone will say, look, I've got this product, I've got a patent for it, I've got a patent pending or whatever, and I want to license it. And they usually look for somebody either manufacture it or somebody to be able to sell it on their behalf. The amount of time and effort to go into that is actually quite a lot from our point of view, because it really involves the sales effort. You're trying to get in touch with the right people. You've then got all the issues about royalties and that type of thing, and whether they're going to have exclusivity on the product. Whereas for us, the franchising side tends to be more about replicating a business and allowing somebody to operate that business in a number of locations. And it's interesting that from a income perspective, and I think it's a bit of a peculiarity in the franchise industry, is that quite often the business can earn far more money through franchising than it could by operating on its own. If you've got a franchisor with a network of say 40 franchises, if you look at the monthly royalties plus the initial fee that they've paid, if you add those up, those are quite often going into 7 figures over the size of the network. And quite often that business wouldn't be generating that sort of income at all. And we also think it's a new income stream for a business, and it's fantastic if you have got a business where you want to expand, but you would find it difficult to develop that business in other areas. So let's say you're running a cleaning company in Swansea and you want to open a branch in Newcastle. It's much easier to get a franchisee who's based there, who has the local knowledge, has the local accent, knows, has all the contacts. They'll do a far better job running it on site there than you would remotely from Swansea. So from a growth perspective, it's a fantastic opportunity.
So just, Siobhan, just picking up on what you were saying there, you were talking about the franchise agreement and the operations manual being the Bible. I mean, if you're buying a franchise, you're going to come across those two documents, and if you're creating a franchise, you're going to have to get involved in it. What's the sort of legal status of those, and how do they sort of sit alongside each other?
Well, your franchise agreement is the contract that you're entering into with your franchisees. So that sort of covers the legal side of the relationship between you, and it will set out things like the amount of fees that you have to pay. And typically you would pay an initial fee to purchase a franchise, There'd be ongoing sort of royalties, often called a monthly service fee, or it could be called anything, but it's generally a monthly fee that you have to pay. And sometimes in addition to that, there's other fees sort of around advertising that you need to pay to your franchisor. It would also set out the area, so often called the territory, in which you're being permitted to operate, and whether or not you're the exclusive franchisee in that area. And it would also set out again the legal obligations on each party. So in terms of the obligations on the franchisor, it would be to train your franchisees. And there's usually obligations around giving sort of ongoing support and initial help with marketing, that type of thing. And it will have a very long list of obligations on a franchisee in terms of everything they need to do. So it will be to ensure that you, for example, comply with any instructions that you are given by your franchisor, your obligations, if any, to have refresher training, any sort of qualifications that you might need to hold, and anything that maybe is bespoke to that franchise sector. It will also include things like any restrictive covenants, so non-compete type provisions that you must adhere to for the duration of your franchise, and also for a particular period after its termination. It will deal with how the franchise can be terminated. Usually there's no right to terminate for a franchisee, but a franchisor can terminate in usually quite a large number of circumstances, primarily around breach. That's most of the causes of early termination, is breach of the agreement by the franchisee. And it also sets out sort of paths to renewing your franchise or selling your franchise and that kind of thing. The manual, on the other hand, is a much more fluid document that will be updated from time to time by the franchisor, and that really sets out the day-to-day operational side of the business. So how you run your business, and ideally a good manual will effectively cover everything, so that if you have a question about what you need to do next, you should be able to go to the relevant section of your manual, and that will guide you as to how you run that business from opening up in the morning to closing down at night. So the manual is not normally part of the contract per se between you, because, as I say, the franchisor will want to update it from time to time, because the franchisor will usually have an obligation to continue developing the franchise model and improving it as much as they can, and then with that comes updating then the day-to-day running of the business. However, the manual is a really significant document, because typically the franchisee will have a legal obligation in the franchise agreement, to comply strictly with everything that's set out in the manual. So if the franchisee doesn't comply with it, then that will usually give the franchisor the right to terminate the agreement, usually straight away, or after a period if the franchisee is given notice to sort of pull their socks up and they fail to do so. So they're both really important documents, but the franchise agreement is the strict legal relationship, and the manual is more the day-to-day side of things.
And it's interesting that point about the manual, isn't it? I mean, that's the backbone of the business. I mean, Kevin, I imagine you get involved with talking to clients about their manuals, do you?
It's like a Forth Road Bridge; it never ends. You start painting it on day one, and then day 365, you think you've finished, and you have to go back to the beginning. As Siobhan said earlier, it's a bit of a moving feast. When we do our consultancy with clients, we usually set out for 8 to 10 week time, and I can guarantee that in every one of those situations, the manual is not finished in 10 weeks. But we always tell them it has to be ready for when the first franchisee comes on board. And quite often, and I've seen a variety of, I've seen some that are works of art, and I've seen some that you think, well, how are you going to operate a business from this? Because it doesn't cover anywhere near enough. We do get involved in I wouldn't say so much writing them, but we get involved in compiling them, because it's difficult for us to write the manual, because we're not running that business on a day-to-day basis. That content needs to come from the franchisor, and I think the franchisors need to understand as well the importance of keeping it updated. It's all well and good dropping someone an email to say, oh, we've updated the manual, and it's page 28. But we always advise them, get a response back from the franchisee to say they acknowledge that they received the update. Because if there is a dispute and someone says, well, I didn't realize that had been done. Well, we emailed you, I didn't even email. So you need an acknowledgement to come back. But it's you know, it's the textbook that the franchisee operates by. And the one thing we will always do as soon as the manual is written is we will sanity check it. So we will read it as a potential franchisee. And we will throw back and say, you know, you've got this 3-letter acronym in here. What does it mean? You know what it means because you're doing it on a day-to-day basis. But as a franchisee, I wouldn't have a clue what that means. You know, and just simple things. You know, we make sure that they serial number them, that they're signed for, and that actually at the front of the manual it says this is the property of the franchisor. You know, there's a copyright to it. It can't be duplicated or copied and you know, given to anybody. And if anybody outside of the franchise is looking at it, then the franchisees are always told to make sure they sign a non-disclosure agreement. And again, there's usually a section in all the manuals that the companies we deal with. There's a section in there of the names of people who've seen the manual and the fact that they've agreed to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Right.
And Peter, from your perspective as a lender, I mean, people coming to you all the time for money to start up franchises and buy franchises. I mean, do you get involved at all? I mean, what sort of things could they expect to be asked by you into? So, say a franchisor or some prospective franchisors looking for funding to franchise their business. I mean, do you get involved in looking at the manual or that kind of thing as part of your due diligence?
Yeah, I mean, those are the sort of documents we expect to see, absolutely. So yes, we'd expect to see a prospective franchisor's ops manual, their franchise agreement, and I guess the franchise information manual memorandum is normally a good document for us as well, which really covers off all of the key points. So those are things, yes, we like to see, and obviously we can compare them against what we know and what we see on a regular basis. So whilst we're not legal professionals, we do see a lot of those documents, so we can sort of certainly highlight if something looks a little bit out of place, and maybe just question and find out why that point's in there, or whatever that might be.
And have you built anything more into your due diligence in relation to kind of lockdown and COVID type events? I mean, is that something that you now think about when you're considering lending to either franchise a business or buy a business as a franchise?
Yeah, I mean, the key element for us always comes down to serviceability of funds we're going to lend. I mean, we need to prove those. So absolutely, so if a business is not able to trade currently, or a franchisee is not able to trade, then we're going to struggle to be able to offer funding for those businesses. So absolutely, so yes, it's very much understanding what is the model now, what was it previously, what changes have been made, are the pre-COVID projections and business plan still viable and usable, or do they need to be sort of turned on their head and started again? So all those sorts of things, absolutely, there is undoubtedly an impact now. We just need to understand those.
Yeah, and I'm guessing there was a period, wasn't there, when there wasn't a great deal of new lending going on to this type of business. I mean, are the doors open again for that kind of thing? Or?
We are absolutely, we're open for business. We never formally closed for business, but I guess that we were lending to businesses who were trading in a positive or at pre-COVID levels. So I guess if you're unaffected by COVID, yes, we could continue to lend, because we can evidence you can afford to repay. So I guess it was just a little bit more of that sort of sensitivity around, are you able to repay the monies, and that's one of the key points of what we need to look at.
And just sort of coming back around to the idea of franchising a business at the moment. I mean, given that things have been tough for a while now, and we've got a recession on the way. I mean, I'm just thinking in terms of the efforts that franchisors have to go to market their businesses, and I'm thinking in particular when we get all the glossy brochures about how it's all going to go, and this will happen and that will happen, and these will be your your likely profits. And a lot of those are there obviously to incentivize sales. I mean, Kevin, from your perspective, do you feel as though franchisors are having to work a lot harder to sell franchises than maybe they were before?
It depends on the type of business, Steve. As I said earlier, there's a much bigger pool now of potential franchisees out there. But then the sectors are shrunk. As I said, if you're running a swimming club or an after-school club or something, we're not seeing anything, any inquiries really coming in for them. Where the franchisors sometimes let themselves down is they're quite happy to devote investment and a budget to a nice glossy prospectus, but then they're not wanting to put that into the rest of the marketing. you know, and advertising costs money, you
Mm.
know, and it's the more sites and the more places you get your name out there, the better your chances of selling a franchise, you know. So it's very difficult. But if you only commit, you know, £1,000 to marketing, you're probably only going to get on one website, maybe
Yeah.
for 3 months. You know, you really do need, when if you've got a business now and you're thinking, I want to franchise it, what's it going to cost me? Then you need to be thinking not just of that initial investment, and it is an investment. It's not a cost really; it's an investment into getting that business ready. But you need to be putting aside a reasonable marketing budget. I'm not talking the tens of thousands, but I'm talking to maybe £5,000 or £6,000 to get your name out there. And if you're in a market that's pretty competitive, you know, if you're in the contract cleaning market, there are 20, 30, 40 different contract cleaning franchises out there. You've got to set yourself apart somehow, you know, and really the only way to do that is to make sure that you know your name is out there and your offering has got some sort of USP. And that's probably the longest conversation I have when a business is ready. We get them to that stage and say, we're ready to launch now. What have you thought about marketing? Oh, well, I've really, you know, I've probably spent too much doing this. Well, then you know what it's like. If you keep doing the same things, you'll keep making the same mistakes.
Yeah.
You know, you have to do something different, and you have to do something that's going to give you a fighting chance of selling franchises. You know, and people are, you know, franchise websites are very, very busy at the moment. Very, very busy. You know, people are on them all the time, and there are people out there with pots of money waiting to buy something. So, you know, what you don't want to do is limit your opportunity to get to them.
And Peter, from your, sorry, Siobhan, you say?
I was just going to say, I sort of as well, circling back to something you said earlier about a lot of people perhaps actively looking to purchase franchises. I do think franchisors, I think it's really important that you invest money, as Kevin said, but also time thinking about what is an ideal franchisee for you, because it will completely depending on the type of your business and also your own personality type, because you have to work with these people. And I think you have to be really mindful that, you know, you don't want to end up with someone who's trying to buy a job effectively, because that's not going to be a successful relationship. And you know, your franchisees are sort of the heartbeat really of your business and your network. And it's very easy, I think, to get tempted to sort of take a franchisee because they're there, as opposed to taking them because they're the right person. And just in terms of on the legal side, for what we see, a lot of the time franchisee disputes occur because probably it was never the right fit in the first place. So I think it's really worth sitting down and thinking about it and really putting time and effort into that procedure.
Yeah, I think the bums on seats approach is not the right way, because all you get with bums on seats is you get left with a lot of bums. You know, and franchisors are more choosy and more picky, but as are the franchisees. You know, because of the internet and everything, you know, you can see what a business is like now relatively easily. There doesn't seem to be that panic to want to buy a franchise. There's a much more well-informed approach to it. We always, in our conversations with potential franchisees, is we'll always look at their skill set and try to identify, is this right for you? You know, and if it's not, we will guide them away from it. And we're open with the franchisors as well to say, because a franchise is like a marriage, you don't want somebody, you know, it's going to last for a minimum 5 years, and maybe they're going to extend for another 5 years, but in some cases they're 10-year franchises. You've got to be able to work with these people hand in hand. And what you don't want are problem children. You know, you're never going to get 100% happy network. You're going to get a small 10% who are unhappy, but for varying reasons. Mostly they're little niggly things that you can put right. But what you don't want, and it's not in our interest as the consultancy, and it's not in the franchisor or the franchisee's interest, is 3 months down the line, the franchisee is saying, this is not what I thought I was buying. You know, and the franchisor's thinking, well, you know, this guy shouldn't have bought this. So we always say to the client, it's not how many can I sell and how much can I sell it for, it's how many will I bring on board that will grow my network over a sustainable amount of time. And hopefully, you know, these people will be successful and get to a point where they will want to sell their franchise because they made enough money from it. And a franchisee leaving the network is not a negative thing. It's a very positive thing, because it allows, it proves that the business works. And then it allows the franchisor to bring a new franchisee in who may be even better than the previous franchisee.
Well, I think those are all really good thoughts, and we've had a quite a good discussion this morning about various topics in relation to sort of growth in the franchising sector. And we could probably keep going for another hour and just going round the different topics, but obviously we want to make this a manageable podcast or webinar. I'm not quite sure which one it is, but I just wanted to come to each of you with any kind of final thoughts you've got on the topics that we've been talking about this morning. I guess from the listeners or the watchers' perspective, in terms of any takeaways that you might want to sort of give to them. So coming to you first, Peter, any kind of last thoughts you've got really about, you know, franchising for growth in the future?
I think absolutely franchising remains to be a really positive sector, one that you can grow a successful business within, and for the right people and the right brands, it's a great way of life, one that we as a bank continue to support. I just think more than ever that diligence from franchisees and franchisors when they're choosing the right investment and the right person is key. Funding is still very much available. You know, we are funding now for new sort of startups for the right opportunities, and that this will grow as COVID fades away, the vaccines roll out. Those brands that we can support again will grow again, because, you know, more people will be able to trade normally, and then they're back on our list of being able to sort of be funded. So I think it's only going to go one way. You know, historically, you know, franchising has always performed well after dips in the economy. So I think we will see that again. Yes, we're in uncharted territory, but I think we're going to see a positive upturn. And yeah, I think it's just that diligence is key more than anything. Yeah,
well, that's great. Thanks, Peter. And you, Kevin?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Peter said there. I think that, you know, franchising is probably the number one route to expand your business. You know, the franchise market in the UK is worth around 18 billion. And there's still lots of opportunities for business to enter it. You know, if you've got a business that you can replicate that's successful, then why not do it? As I said earlier, you know, it's a great way to grow a new income stream. It's a great way to operate maybe in an area that you couldn't control yourself. And we're not seeing, and we don't imagine we're going to see a downturn on this at the moment. You know, with the recession coming along, we're probably going to see lots of households where that second income is under pressure, maybe for the next couple of years. So we just see that there will be continued growth. And thankfully, as Peter said, there is funding available, not, you know, through the banks, through the government startup loan scheme. So it's not as difficult maybe to be able to fund that franchise.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And finally, you, Siobhan.
Yeah, I think, I kind of echo everything they said. Franchising is a great route to expanding your business. I think it's just always worth being mindful that it's not sort of a fast route to lots of money, which I think some people mistake it for. You know, it is work, a lot of upfront work, but I think it's really rewarding, and it is a great way to expand. And there's a lot of support out there. There's loads of sort of networking groups. There's lots of professional support specialists for the franchising sector. So it's definitely worth exploring.
Well, thanks very much for that roundup from all three of you, and thanks to all of you this morning for participating in this podcast/webinar. Hopefully it's been of interest to those people that listen to it and watch it, and we do these things from time to time. So certainly from the Darwin Gray perspective, if you go to our website, you'll see various events that we have. And if you want any contact details for any of the panelists, please get in touch with us. But thanks for watching and listening, and best of luck.